2 weeks ago, we started it, right, in Genesis chapters 1 and 2. We talked about how God made everything so good and perfect and wonderful. Then last Sunday, we leaned into how we royally messed it all up. We let sin in the back door, and we we ruined everything that God made. We talked about that, and I encourage you, if you maybe missed one of the last 2 Sundays, I just encourage you can tune in on the church app. There's a podcast, so you can go back and listen to them. But this morning, I'm especially looking forward because we had to lean into perhaps a part of Genesis that you are extremely familiar with. I mean, there are movies that capture this part of the Bible. Movies such as the one that Russell Crowe did a number of years in 2014 called Noah, right? And then Steve Carell's movie, Evan Almighty, even has the backdrop of the flood and Noah's Ark, right? And it kind of has that part. But we all know, I mean, let's not kid ourselves. We all know that the greatest Noah's Ark flood movie of all time is VeggieTales. Absolutely, right? And so we're familiar with this part of Genesis. I mean, if you grew up in church, at some point in history, like every church nursery went all in on this idea that the theme has to be Noah's Ark, right? I mean, I don't know where that started, when that started, but I mean, before we planted this church when we used to live in the upstate, I was on staff at a church where in our nursery, the person who had painted Noah in the ark, Noah had 6 fingers. I don't know how they lost count in painting it, but I wonder if there was ever somebody who was walked in my name's Inigo. Hang on, I know you're the 6. I'm just kidding. That was a terrible dad joke. Anyway, but I don't know where. I wish I would have been at the meeting, right, where churches decided that's what we're gonna do, right? I could just there's in a boardroom setting, all right, listen, we gotta think of a nursery theme for all of churches. Okay. What about Daniel in the lion's den? Oh, yeah, it's courage and faith. Yeah, it'd be so great. What about the moment where Jesus takes a little boy's lunch? Yeah, and he multiplies it to feed all. Yeah, that'd be so cool. And then there's the one guy who's what if we took the most scary part of the Bible where everyone dies, and then we paint it with everyone smiling, including the animals, right? Let's do that. Let's make everyone smiling on the wall. It'd be great, even the giraffes too. I wish I would have been in the meeting. But even then, not only that, right, I saw this the other day. Now AI has started to have fun in creating different things for us that I saw this, I had to share it. It was hilarious. If you can't read, it says, terrible cruise, rained the whole time. They did have a great buffet. I had 2 of everything, all right? And so, but now even, we're familiar with the account of the flood and Noah's Ark, that part of Genesis. But friends, perhaps there's a question in it. We maybe are even familiar too with why. We know why from some of the movies or things that we've brought up being told or even our times of reading it. Familiar with why God says, hey, I'm going to make it rain and it will flood the earth. We kind of get an idea of why. But friends, I have a sense that there's a question that we have never asked that has to be asked. It's one that I've asked, and it's one perhaps if we spend time kind of leaning into, actually helps us understand a very, very significant reason behind the flood and what God was trying to communicate to the world. I mean, to recap in the first few chapters, Genesis 1 and 2, the creation account. Chapter 3, God shares with us the fall of Adam and Eve and their decision to reject God and rebel against him. Chapter 4 tells us the story of Cain and Abel. But then even too in chapter 4, it captures how Adam and Eve, they had many more children. They don't tell us all of what the heart content is like for the rest of their kids, but they do tell us about one son they have, a son named Seth. And it says there towards the end of chapter 4, it says that Seth is kind of like his older deceased brother Abel, and he loves God. Seth loves the Lord. Then chapter 5 gives us a long family tree. Maybe if you've ever read through Scripture, you see how occasionally we get a long family tree that stems from one person of the family. And in chapter 5 covers 10 generations, going from Adam and Eve, and then right to Seth, and then all of Seth's family tree. And it goes all the way down, and then it ends telling us about this man named Noah. Noah even had many brothers and sisters, but what Scripture begins to tell us as we turn the page to chapter 5 is that everyone else, even all of Noah's siblings, everyone else has turned away from God. And it says this in chapter 6, verse 1. And we'll actually read through. There's a lot to unpack as we talk through this because, again, the teacher part of me loves to come out and lean into moments like this where typically a lot of people have a lot of amazing questions. It begins this in verse 1 of chapter 6. It says, when human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Now, perhaps you've ever heard there's one idea where the sons of God refers to kind of angels that have fallen from heaven, have gone now and married these women. There's this idea, if you watch the movie Noah with Russell Crowe, it kind of reflects that. But one very commonly across many scholars believe this idea that this is actually referring to this beautiful poetic kind of contrast where the sons of God were the men of Seth's family who were faithful to God, and how many of them over time married the daughters of him people. So men of God and women whose hearts did not belong to God. And it contrasts them with sons of God and daughters of humans. And how now, through this, they marry with each other, they come together, and out of that, that's where Seth's family tree, all but Noah, start to fall away from God. It says this in verse 3, it says, then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal, their days will be 120 years. And I've had people ask me, he's like, Andre, that's God saying that now only people will live to be up to 120 years. But then they're like, but I gotcha, because there are people after that who live over that. But this moment is not saying God is putting a cap on how all people will always live for the rest of time. What's happening is that moment right there in that text, God is saying in 120 years, I'm going to remove everybody from the world. And he's promising already right here that one day a flood will come, and he'll get to it later, but in 120 years' time, a flood will come, and it will kill everybody. Their days are numbered. The clock is ticking 120 years from this moment. Then into verse 4, it says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old and renowned. And this is a great part when and actually there's so many scholar interpretations of what is because it's fascinating as you read through the early parts of this. It almost sounds like it steps into another story for a moment. It's like God is talking about his heartache with how the world has become and now their days are numbered. And then it kind of steps into another moment and tells a side story. And it refers to this group of people called Nephilim, where these people are large. They have kind of growth disorders. Goliath is one later in Scripture, but these people who grow and grow and grow and grow, and they're like almost kind of perceived giants who are strong. And it talks about how these are people, heroes of old that people would look up to. But I have to wonder if in here it talks about these people, and God says, even them. These people you respected, these stories that you'd share around the campfire, these people that I wanted to be one day, even their hearts had fallen away from me. Even those people who you thought were the good guys, even their hearts didn't belong to me. It says in verse 5, the Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil at the time. The Lord had regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. What's fascinating is that regret in a human experience is where we feel immense remorse and we say, I wish I hadn't have done that. Now, God being all-knowing, he knows all what is to come. He's not surprised by this. But in our human understanding of the emotion of God, we use the word regret to reflect his immense remorse, his immense heartache. for what has happened to the hearts and mind of all of the children that he has made, all the people who have come about out of his creation that were supposed to reflect his image, people who were supposed to be his sons and his daughters. They have fallen so far away that even he is so deeply troubled by all of it. In verse 7 it says, "So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with all the animals, the birds and creatures that move along the ground, for I regret I have made them." But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Noah found favor. Unlike the rest of humanity, unlike the rest of his own family, his siblings, and those before him, he clung to God. He made sure his wife did. He made sure his kids did. He made sure that those that his sons and daughters married, that they too would also cling to God. In the coming verses, God will approach Noah. He'll tell him his plan to flood the earth, and he tells him, I need you to go build this massive vessel that we called an ark, and I want you to go and build it. And he gives him all the parameters of how to build it. I think it's so fascinating that as Noah is hearing this, I just had to imagine he's hearing this. He's like, wow, this is going to be a big boat. And God said, listen, it's going to be way bigger than what you think. And he actually is like, listen, you have to make it this big because all these animals are going to come onto it. And it gives him all the dimensions of what to build. And it takes him a long time. I mean, from the moment of the earlier verse, God said 120 years from now, I'm going to bring the flood. It takes Noah roughly between 60 to 90 years to build the ark. Like, wow, a massive project. I mean, some of us guys, we start a project and then we stop and then we'll get to it one day. But hopefully there's not a project that takes us 90 years to complete. All right, gentlemen? And maybe there's one that I'm like, I need to get to today, or I need to do that. But it took Noah forever to build. And it's amazing, too, that God said, listen, in the later part of chapter 6, God tells him, listen, you need to bring a lot of food. You need to bring a ton of food because you're going to be on this for a long time. What happens is God explains to Noah that 7 pairs of every clean animal will come and that 1 pair of every unclean animal will come aboard the ark. It says it's going to rain for 40 days. You're going to be inside of that, but then the earth will be filled for 150 days. Wow. And then it takes another almost over 200 days for the water to recede. So they are on the ark for 371 days. Wow. And then once it is all over, as they turn the page into chapter 8, the first thing Noah and his family do is they get off the ark, they build an altar, which, fascinating enough, I don't know if you've seen this lately, but archaeologists believe they perhaps have found kind of this place of worship that Noah and his family built. But what they do is they go and they take some of the clean animals that God had told them to bring, and they sacrifice and worship the Lord. Wow. God is clear about why he did this, and perhaps, again, we know that humanity was so evil. It's hard for us to picture this kind of evil. We live in a country where it is extremely safe. And even though bad things happen and crime and things like that, it is nothing compared to the darkness that exists in many parts of the world even today. And that's how the whole world was. When God looked around understand that it had been about 1,600 years between Adam and Eve and the flood, 1,600 years. And the population of humanity had grown and grown and grown and grown and grown. And the Lord said, all of it, all but this one family, so dark. The flood was used to cleanse the world, to start over. It's actually why in the Old Testament, God's people use baptism as a spiritual practice in their faith to symbolize their decision of kind of the past being washed away and walking with God. That's why John the Baptist, right? Before Jesus even comes, John the Baptist goes marching around telling people if they need to be baptized to show that their hearts belong to God. And that's why, too, when Jesus comes in the world, baptism goes from referencing to the flood now to actually representing and symbolizing Christ's death in the tomb and his resurrection back to life. And that's why baptism has always been God's call to people when they have committed for the first time their heart to Jesus, or even have recommitted their heart to God. That baptism is this practice that God's people have always done for all of time. But now comes the question, perhaps, that we haven't asked. This question that I don't know if you've ever asked, but it's one recently I had. But the flood came because of how evil the world was. But why instead of the flood didn't Christ come then? See, we have the benefit being on this side of history. We know what happens after the flood, and then with Abraham and his lineage, the rest of Genesis and the rest of the Old Testament. We know what God's end game the entire time was, that being on this side of history. Back then they didn't know, but we do today. And it seems like God could have pressed the fast forward button and said, you know what, instead of doing the flood, and instead of going through all of Abraham's family, instead of establishing a kingdom of my own and doing all this stuff and using the people of God, the Israelites, and them being enslaved and all the things with the kings of Israel, instead of all this stuff and them going into exile, instead of all that happening, which, by the way, again, was 2,400 years. So from the flood to Jesus, 2,400 years, God could have pressed the fast forward button and said, if this was the end game, why didn't he do it then? I mean, imagine what all would have been different. They would never have been enslaved in Egypt. A period of judges where for a few hundred years, God's people, they hated God. They were so rebellious. They spit in his face over, and then they're like, please help us, and they'd spit him in the face again. Over and over. David would never have had an affair with Bathsheba, which then ruined their family, then ruined the kingdom. God's people would never have been handed over to other nations. He could have just pressed the fast forward button. And I know that our God always plays the long game, but I can't help but wonder why. On the surface, we know why the flood happened. But out of all the things that he could have done, why didn't Christ come then? And as I have chewed on this, I've started to realize some very, very intentional, powerful truths about why the flood happened that, frankly, no nursery painting has ever communicated, or even VeggieTales too. See, one thing it's meant to teach humanity is that sin requires justice. Understand, Adam and Eve sort of got to understand this, but they got to understand it on a one-to-one scale. And then Cain as well as other people in Cain's family who would also do horrible things. They would understand God's justice to them on a one-to-one. You did something wrong, so here's your justice is being served to you. But for the first time across all of humanity, this is the very first time where everybody goes down for everybody else. And you see, understand through the flood, we're recognizing that, frankly, justice is making right what has been done wrong. And in the story, in the narrative, in the account of the flood, God is trying to help humanity understand that this thing that they have brought into the world now requires justice. And now, friends, I need us to understand in a talking about our faith and talking about God, maybe perhaps you kind of lean towards the idea that judgment and justice just don't seem like they would fit well in our talk about who God is. But understand, it is much of who God is. Understand, even as people, even as human beings, we love justice. We love justice. Of course, not towards ourselves, but towards other people. Just picture it. Imagine everybody hold the steering wheel with me. Everybody put their hands up. Imagine you're grabbing the steering wheel. Imagine you're heading to work, or you're going to take your kids to the park, or you're going to get groceries or whatever. You're going to Chick-fil-A for the third time that day. And imagine you're just driving somewhere, and imagine there's somebody who comes flying up behind you. Right, and I don't mean like they're just in a rush. You're like, oh, you just know what's going on there. You don't even know who they are. We're like, that person, they're a jerk, right? And they're tailgating you, right? They're going in and out trying to get around you. And what begins to happen? You're sitting there, you're looking at the mirror, and you're like, and your blood starts boiling, right? You don't even know who they are, right? They could be on their way to the hospital, but you're like, oh, they're so mean, right? And then they go to pass you, and you're driving, and then they have to like cut you off, like to get in front of you before they hit someone else, and so you hit your brakes, and you're like, your blood's boiling. You're yelling too, right? You're like, oh my goodness, come on, what are you doing? Like all that stuff, right? Your blood is boiling. But then you get around the bend of the road, and then you see these blue lights, and you see that someone got pulled over, and your first thought is, I really hope it was that person. And then when you see that it was, you're like, in your face. Like you're driving by, you're like, got you. That's what you get. We love justice. We love it. And maybe you married a woman who loves justice so much and like, I was right and you were not and all that stuff, but we love justice. Understand, our God is one of justice. See, God's justice is his perfect response to sin, and it is his faithful defense of what is good. To protect Noah and his family, to protect the creation that he made, even all of the animals in creation that he has made. He sees the very evil heart of humanity, and in a sense, to bring justice for what they have done and his defense of what he has made that is good, he brings the flood. And friends, understand that God's justice, it judges those who have done wrong. It gives comfort to those who have been wronged. Stands up for those who are vulnerable and unprotected. It upholds what is right and wrong in the world. God's justice restores peace. In our American view of Christianity, we always say God is love, God is love. He doesn't judge, he doesn't bring justice, but understand that God can't be love without justice. I remember talking to someone who'd been so deeply wronged, horribly wronged by someone they trusted. It was borderline criminal, and the person who wronged them got away scotch-free. They never got in trouble with anyone else, the law or with work or anything like that. And that person even disappeared. They were never held accountable for what they had done. And I remember talking to the person who had been wronged, and they were just overwhelmed with anger and bitterness and sadness and grief and sorrow. I remember we talked, and I said, justice may not have been done right now by the hands of people. But you can find hope in knowing that God sees the injustice done to you, and he will bring justice. It may not be today, and it may not be tomorrow, and it may not be how you want it to happen, but God won't forget, and his justice is perfect. You see, it is out of God's love for people that justice has to exist in who God is. He sees the cruel acts and desires that bring immense injustice into the world, and so to resolve it, he brings justice. And we say, oh, not all sin is the same. Not all stuff is injustice. Well, listen, understand God is clear about what sin is. He says all sin violates what I've told you to do. All sin violates love toward neighbor, self, and God. When asked about how we could keep from sinning, Jesus says, listen, love God with all you are, all of who you are, and love your neighbor as yourself. And in those two simple statements, he just simply reflects and refers to loving neighbor, self, and God. And all of sin, usually all the time, every bit of sin that we do, listen, relates to those three all at the same time. Violating one of those is violating all of them, other, self, or God. And friends, sin requires justice. And that is where the flood reveals to humanity the fact that sin requires justice. And we need to see this, because if we don't realize it, friends, understand, if we don't realize that the flood was an act of justice for sin, then we will never understand why the cross was necessary. Because God didn't press the fast forward button to get to the cross because humanity would not have understand their need for it anyway. They would not have understand why Jesus would need to be executed and beaten and tortured, and how that sacrifice would be enough to cover the justice of God that has been due on humanity. Understand that instead of striking down humanity again, Jesus took on that justice on himself. It is why when on the cross he says, Father, why have you forsaken? Why have you left me? When God himself is there on the cross, he feels the weight of sin of humanity so heavy and burden on him that he begins to feel the pulling away from himself and the Father. All of the justice that had been given through the flood, instead of all of humanity being dished out something later on, Christ took all of it. For those who want him to take on their justice, Jesus is saying, I'll take it. Those who want me to take it, I'll take it. For those who trust in me and live for me, I will take it. This is a part of the beautiful love that God tells us about what he is accomplishing on the cross, and the flood reveals this. The flood reveals what is waiting for every single person because of sin in their life. And I have to wonder if we were to go back in time and to interview all these people who died in the flood, there'd be some horrible human beings. But then there'd be some people who are like, yeah, I just stole some bread one time, but it was okay. Or I hurt my wife, or I did this to hurt my kids, or I did this to do that, or I did this. But it wasn't as bad as those people over there. You see, as human beings, we have this tendency to say, well, yeah, sure, I'm not perfect, but I'm not as bad as that person. And so that becomes our gauge for where we're at on God's scale. But understand, remember what the Lord said. This is all of sin, all of it. It doesn't matter how you view it as less than good. Remember from last Sunday, listen, we had the one glass of water reflecting what is good and what is great of God. And it says all of sin is this darkness of death. And in our mind, we think that there's this, there's 100% good, and that's of God, but then also there's like a 99%, there's a 98%, and a 96%, and somehow in us, we get this scale of what is good and not good, and we think, okay, maybe I'm not doing something super evil, but maybe I'm a little bit less. No, all of it, God says all of this is death. All of it. Anything less than 100 is death. All of sin violates love towards others, self, and God. It doesn't matter if we see it as big or small in our own eyes. It requires justice. And the flood reveals this. But what is so incredible is that there's a second core truth, a vital truth of what the flood is meant to reveal. Not only does it reveals that sin requires justice, but it also begins to reveal that justice is only a response to sin. It does not remove it. Because when Noah and his family, they worshiped the Lord after the flood. And then God says this to Noah and his family. In chapter 8, verse 20, it says this. It says, then Noah built an altar to the Lord, taking some of all the clean animals and clean birds. He sacrificed burnt offerings on it. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said, listen to what the Lord says. Never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. God is not talking about back with all those people who just died, even when looking at Noah and his family. That's still inside of you. He says, and never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done. You see, the flood is also meant to reveal to us, friends, that justice only responds to sin. It does not remove it. Because what happens next in chapter 9 is actually one of Noah's sons, his son Ham, actually sins against him, and then we start the cycle all over again. Even though God brought immense destruction to the world, and Noah and his family, they saw it. They still, after it was over, went right back into the mess that brought the flood in the first place. Justice doesn't remove the sin inside of us. It doesn't fix what is frankly wrong with humanity. And even though God throughout the Old Testament brings justice in this moment of the flood, and he brings justice in other moments towards other people even, he brings justice over and over. It never changed people's hearts. It never changed them. Friends, that's because justice is not a cure for sin. Jesus is. And God said he so loved the world that he gave his only son. Whoever would believe in him would not perish, but have everlasting life. I remember once talking to an older gentleman. He was older later in life, and he had an issue with his hip, and so he'd walk kind of like this, and he had some unique ideas, and so we'd talk. And he would always come with such a unique question. I remember once he looked at me and said, Andre, he wasn't a Christian. He was very much opposed to Christianity. And he said, Andre, like God did it wrong. And I was like, okay, like that's a unique way to start this conversation. You go right ahead. He's like, God just did it wrong. God should have given us all a list of what to do and what not to do. He should have just told us, do this, or don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And then God should have just said, here's what to do. And then he says, if you disobey, this will happen. Like, God should have just done that. He gives us the whole Bible. It's so long. He's like, it's confusing. He's like, God could have just given us 10 pieces of paper, and everyone could get it, and everyone could get along. And I looked at him. I said, it's a unique idea. I said, but God tried that. You see, when he had Adam and Eve, he said, don't eat from this tree or you will die. And they still did it. And then fast forward a few years, God gives humanity the 10 Commandments. That's a pretty short list. I mean, if you have all your fingers, that's, all of them. That's pretty easy to remember. And he tells them, if you don't do this, then here's what's going to happen in Leviticus. And they still don't listen. And it wasn't like hard stuff either. But they still couldn't do it. And then he tells them, just love God with all of who you are and love your neighbor as yourself. And it was simple. And from 10 to 2, and they still couldn't do it. God tried that. Which is why out of love, he took our justice due to us for the sin in our life. He took our justice on the cross. And then through the resurrection and through the gift of the Holy Spirit, all those who belong to Jesus and are following him can experience a made new life. I remember I shared that with him, and he was like, well, I guess I never saw it that way. And then he went hobbling away. Friends, I urge you to realize that so many people in the world don't understand this about the world and why life is the way it is and the heart of humanity. Our way with Jesus, Christianity, our journey with God is not a DIY adventure. It's not a do this on your own and you'll figure it out. Only through Jesus. Friends, in your walk with him, keep surrendering your heart all the more let him in. Let him keep making you new from the inside out. Friends, it is heartbreaking that here recently we have now seen another major Christian figure in our country fall. We've seen it across social media. We've seen it across the news. Now another major Christian figure has fallen. One who for many years on the outside looked good and fine, but behind the scenes was dying from sin. Never experiencing new life from God. Friends, listen, Jesus offers us healing and forgiveness, a new life, and a changed heart. We can try to do it on our own. We can try to pull up our bootstraps on our own and try to figure out as we go along. But it does not change what is deeply rooted inside of us, this darkness that is hungry for what we know we shouldn't have, but our appetite wants it all the more. I urge you to stop being lukewarm or having one foot in both worlds. I urge you to stop letting all these things of the world hold you back and hand yourself all the more over to Jesus. It's not a religion, it's a relationship where you believe so much more that he is just real. You actually love him and want to spend time with him. And you start to read his word, and it begins to now shape your life. And it changes you, not starting here, but it starts on the inside of here. And as you read, God just all of a sudden, he begins to speak. And it's like a soft, gentle voice that is sharpening and molding, convicting, but lifting up all the more of who you are on the inside. Friends, that is our journey with Jesus. Friends, I urge you to go all the deeper and more with him. I urge those of you who are more mature in your walk with Jesus to know this truth about sin requiring justice and how justice does not remove sin. That's where Jesus comes in. It matters that we know this because we have a generation around us. We have a world around us that is not knowing this, not living by this, not understanding this. And so they look at the cross and they think, I don't really need that. We read the Bible and say, if the flood happened today, I'd actually probably be on the boat. I don't think I'd be in the water with all these guys. I'd probably be on the boat. We have this view of ourselves that is so different than God's view of us. Friends, we need to not beat ourselves down in that sort of way, but understand how much we need him. And out of that, we discover his love. His great, wild, all-consuming love that changes everything about our life. Friends, people are hurting. People all around us feel so alone. And you have the peace of life inside of you, given to you by Christ. So help them find it. Help them find it. Why don't we go to the Lord in prayer together?